relationship ended, nobody slammed a door. There was no dramatic confession, no affair, no screaming in a restaurant, no sentence built to become a permanent scar. It ended in a kitchen full of half-packed boxes, with the light over the stove flickering every few minutes, and my phone face up on a counter I had wiped 1,000 times beside my mother. I was waiting for a plate of food. That is still the part one hesitate to tell people first, because it sounds too small. It sounds almost childish, like the kind of story that can be solved by saying, well, why didn't you just order something? Why didn't you microwave soup? Why didn't you ask someone else? But people who have not sorted a dead parent's house mistake the practical problem for the actual one. The actual problem is that by the end of a day like that, your body is not just tired. It is altered. Your judgment gets thin. Time goes strange. Every object you touch asks you a question you are not ready to answer. Keep, donate, trash. Save for later. Save for someone else. Save because letting go feels disloyal. Let go because keeping too much feels like drowning. By evening, you are not hungry the way healthy people are hungry. You are hungry the way people are when they have forgotten they are a person all day and suddenly remember they still live in a body. My mother had been gone for 8 months. Even now, that number sounds dishonest. 8 months sounds like enough time to have become steadier, more composed, more able to say words like process and closure without feeling faintly insulted by them. But grief does not move by calendar. It moves by ambush, by the coat still on the hook, by the mug with the faded blue rim that only she used, by finding her handwriting on the back of an appliance warranty and having to sit down on the floor because for half a second it feels like she is still somewhere in the house, just beyond the next doorway. My brothers lived in other towns, with spouses and children and garages full of their own unfolding lives. They called often enough to sound involved. They had opinions about timing, about paperwork, about what made sense. They said it would be better for me if I did not drag this out. They said the house needed to be cleared. They said I had to start thinking about my next step. They said all of this in the careful voice people use when they want credit for being practical. What they did not say was that practicality is easiest to preach from a different address. So most days, it was me opening drawers that still smelled faintly of my mother's hand lotion. Me deciding which pans I could keep in a future apartment I had not yet found. Me holding up sweaters and trying to remember whether memory lived in the fabric or only in me. Me making 100 private decisions no one would ever know enough to thank me for. On the day everything became clear, I had spent the afternoon in the hall closet. That sounds harmless if you have never emptied a life out by category. But the hall closet was where all the accidental history had gathered. Old umbrellas, a sewing tin, 2 winter scarves I had not seen since high school, a flashlight with dead batteries, a folder full of instruction manuals, 3 grocery bags tied shut around cords no one had labeled because she always assumed there would be time later. There was also a dented cake carrier from my 12th birthday, with one side cracked near the handle. I stood there holding it longer than I should have, because my mother had made a coconut cake that year even though she was exhausted from working back-to-back shifts. I remembered powdered sugar on the counter, her laughing because the icing slid, me being embarrassed by how uneven it looked until the first slice was gone and everyone asked for more. That is what sorting grief feels like. You reach in for extension cords and come out carrying an entire afternoon from 15 years ago. By 7, my lower back hurt. By 8, my temples had started to pulse. By 9, the kitchen looked like a place someone had tried to live in and evacuate at the same time. The trash was too full. The sink had a single glass in it and nothing else because I had stopped cooking properly weeks earlier. My stomach felt hollow and annoyed, but not enough to inspire action. My boyfriend Owen had texted earlier that his family had people over, and there would probably be extra food afterward. He asked if I wanted to come by later. Under ordinary circumstances, I might have. But there are evenings when putting on shoes feels like negotiating with concrete. I told him I couldn't leave the house. I told him I was trying to finish one more round of packing before I lost momentum. I told him I was exhausted. Then I asked if, when things wrapped up, he could bring me a plate if there was anything left. Not make me dinner. Not leave his guests early. Not solve my life. Just bring me whatever remained once the evening was done. Rice, pasta, half a sandwich. It did not matter. What I wanted was not cuisine. What I wanted was the feeling that someone understood I had reached the edge of what I could carry for one day. He texted back, "I'll try." At the time, I let those words pass. I even told myself they were reasonable. People say I'll try when they mean maybe. People say I'll try when they do not want to disappoint you yet. People say I'll try when they want credit in advance for effort they have not decided to make. I went back to packing. I lined a box with towels and slid framed photos between them. I found an old receipt with my mother's signature on it and had to stop for a few minutes because the shape of her name looked too alive. I carried one stack to the spare room. Then another. Then another. At some point, I sat on the floor without meaning to. That is another thing grief does. It removes the ceremony from collapse. 1 minute you are standing. The next you are on the ground. Not devastated exactly, just emptied out. When I checked the time again, it was after 10. No food. No update. Just a few casual messages from earlier. And then silence. I called him. He picked up quickly, which almost made me smile. For half a breath, I thought, "There you are." I asked if he was still coming. He said no. Not apologetic. Not rushed. Not even particularly distracted. Just no. Then, as if he were telling me the weather, he added that he was at the gym with a couple of friends playing basketball. I remember looking at the dark microwave door because it reflected my face back at me, and I did not recognize the expression. It was not anger yet. It was the stunned look of someone watching a sentence rearrange the whole room. I said, "You went to play basketball?" He laughed once, lightly, as if I were overemphasizing something harmless. "The food is here if you want it. You can come get it." There are moments when a person's failure is so complete it becomes clarifying. Not because it is the worst thing they could have done, but because it is the smallest thing they still would not do. I told him I was too tired to drive. I said I had been packing all day. I said I thought he understood that. His voice changed then. Not louder, just flatter. He said I was acting like I was the first person on earth to pack up a house. He said if I wanted food that badly, I could get in the car and come pick it up. He said he did not have time to do everything for me. Everything. That word stayed with me longer than the rest. Because I had not asked for everything. I had not even asked for much. And somewhere inside that exaggeration was the truth of how he saw me in that moment. Not as someone grieving, not as someone barely holding shape, but as a burden making demands. I said, "Okay, never mind." Then I hung up before my voice did anything humiliating. The house was quiet, in a way that felt mean. Not peaceful, not restful, mean. Like it was witnessing me and offering no cover. I stood there for a while, one hand on the counter, and tried to decide whether I was actually upset about the food or simply too depleted to tell the difference between physical need and heartbreak. Then I made the mistake of reading his follow-up texts. One said it was ridiculous that I did not have the energy to come pick up dinner. Another said I needed to stop acting like ordinary life was some tragic event. Then, a few minutes later, "You're not the first person who's ever had to clean out a house." That sentence entered me like cold water. Because he was right, in the most useless possible way. Of course I was not the first. I was just the one doing it that night. I was just the one standing in my dead mother's kitchen trying not to cry over a paper box of leftovers. People like Owen always hide cruelty inside general truths. Plenty of people have it hard. Lots of people go through worse. Everybody's tired. Nobody gets special treatment. The trick, of course, is that compassion was never supposed to be distributed by competition. Love is not a panel deciding whether your suffering qualifies. Love notices you are drowning before you have to build a case. I did not go get the food. I made toast instead. One piece burned around the edges because I forgot it in the toaster, while I stared at a row of labeled boxes near the pantry door. The other I ate standing up with butter melting through the middle and crumbs sticking to my palm. I have had better meals in airport vending areas. But that toast is not what I remember most. What I remember is the humiliation of understanding that if I had driven across town for that plate, I would have been collecting evidence against myself. I would have been confirming that he could withhold care until I performed enough effort to deserve it. He came by the next afternoon, holding a takeout container from his parents' fridge like it solved something. The audacity of delayed kindness is hard to describe. It enters a room smiling, expecting applause for arriving after the emergency. He acted normal. That bothered me more than if he had come defensive. He set the container on the counter and asked whether I had made progress with the boxes. Then he kissed my cheek like the previous night had been an inconvenient little misunderstanding. I looked at the container. Cold chicken, rice, a dinner roll wrapped in foil. Perfectly decent food. Completely useless now. I asked him why he had acted like that. He blinked and said, "Like what?" I said. Like bringing me one plate of food was unreasonable. Like I was asking too much. Like I was being dramatic for being exhausted. He shrugged, actually shrugged. Then he said he had not done anything wrong, that he was busy, that I take everything personally lately, that he cannot keep getting punished every time he fails some invisible test. Invisible test. There it was again, the language people use when they resent being measured by ordinary decency. I told him this was not a test. I told him the problem was that he kept talking about my need, as though it were a trap I had set for him. I told him I was not even angry about the meal anymore. I was angry that when I clearly needed tenderness, he treated me like an interruption. His face changed in a way I had seen before, but never named correctly. Not guilt, not reflection. Contempt. He said, "I offered to help you pack, and you didn't want me touching anything." Then he gave a little laugh and added, "Because you're special like that. Special." He stretched the word just enough for it to curdle, as if my grief were performance. As if wanting to decide what happened to my mother's belongings with my own hands were vanity. As if the whole unbearable season of my life could be reduced to me being difficult. I told him to leave. Quietly, because fury had finally become too tired to shout. He stared at me for a second and asked, "What, are you going to cry now?" You do not always realize a relationship is over when someone is cruel. Sometimes cruelty still leaves room for explanation. Bad day, bad timing, poor wording, defensiveness, immaturity. People in love can build ladders out of almost anything. But mockery is different. Mockery means the person is no longer trying to meet your pain, only trying to stand above it. He left. Later that evening, he texted to say maybe it would be healthier if we were friends instead. 3 years, compressed into a sentence designed to make his retreat sound enlightened. Then came a list of my supposed offenses. Nothing he does is ever enough. I always give him grief. I create problems where there are none. I sat on the floor between 2 half-filled boxes and read those messages twice. The first time as accusation. The second time as confession. Nothing he does is ever enough. Meaning, he wants a version of love where attendance counts more than care. You always give me grief. Meaning, my feelings become hostile the moment they ask anything of him. We should just be friends. Meaning, he wants the exit without the villainy. I wish I could tell you I cried, because I missed him. That would make the story neater. But what I felt first was relief. Sharp and almost embarrassing. Relief that I no longer had to translate neglect into something kinder, so I could keep living inside it. The comments people later made, when I finally told the story, all circled the same truth from different directions. Some said a good partner would have been there, helping from the start. Some said the meal was never the issue. Some said the request was so small it exposed everything. And that was the part that stayed with me most. The request was small, so small that only contempt could make it feel enormous. In the weeks after, I finished packing the house. Not gracefully, not with some movie-worthy soundtrack of empowerment. I did it crying sometimes, numb sometimes, angry often, and hungry in the careless way grief makes people hungry. A friend came one morning with coffee and packing tape. My neighbor brought soup in a container she told me not to return. My sister, after we had our own difficult conversation about deadlines and pressure, and who was actually helping, drove over with old newspapers for wrapping dishes, and stayed longer than either of us planned. That was how I learned the difference between inconvenience and care. Real care does not make a speech about how hard it is to show up. It just shows up, with tape, with soup, with 10 quiet minutes beside a donation pile, with the sense that your pain has been noticed and not judged for efficiency. I still think about that plate sometimes. Not because I wanted those leftovers. Not because food became symbolic after the fact. But because, in the middle of one of the loneliest seasons of my life, I asked someone I loved to carry one warm thing toward me, and he decided a game mattered more. Then he acted as though my disappointment was the real offense. That is how some relationships end, long before the official ending. not with betrayal grand enough for strangers to gasp, but with a tiny mercy withheld, and the awful clarity that follows. If you have ever had a moment like that, you know what I mean. The errand was never just the errand. The ride was never just the ride. The meal was never just the meal. It was the answer.
Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, do me one favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops. Remember, nothing is ever just what it seems. See you on the next one.